In a forest consumed by flames, siblings Patrick and Joanne suddenly hear a faint cry rising from the ashes. A fragile sound, like the final plea of a life barely holding on. Following the sound, they discover a bobcat kitten named Lola curled up, her body severely burned and nearly exhausted, as if she were waiting for a miracle. But what makes this story truly special is not just the rescue of a tiny life, but also how Lola slowly heals the deep emotional wounds in Patrick's heart. Wounds left by the traumatic past caused by devastating wildfires. Can a small wild creature learn to trust humans? And does Patrick have the courage to open his heart once again, despite the risk of loss? What happens next completely transforms their lives, going far beyond the boundaries between fear and love. Before we begin this emotional story, please like and subscribe to the channel if you love stories about compassion and healing. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss the next touching journeys. The air tasted like ash and memory. Patrick dragged his boot through a drift of charred wood, each crunch a dull echo of the inferno that had swallowed their lives. Beside him, Joanne stood, a silent, gaunt silhouette against the stark, recovering forest where skeletal pines reached bony fingers toward a sky the color of old denim. Their cabin, or what remained of it, was a gaping maw of twisted metal and blackened beams, a monument to their mother's absence. Every gust of wind through the wreckage seemed to whisper her name, a cruel reminder of the emptiness that now filled the space she once occupied. The lingering scent of smoke, acrid and persistent, clung to their clothes, to their skin, a constant, suffocating reminder of everything they'd lost. Suddenly a sound. Not the wind, not the creak of settling debris, but a faint, raspy cry, thin as thread, barely audible beneath the sigh of the breeze. It was a sound that shouldn't be there, a fragile whisper of life in this landscape of death. Patrick froze, his hand instinctively gripping Joanne's arm. "Did you hear that?" he murmured, his voice raw. Joanne, eyes wide and fixed on the heap of rubble that was once their tool shed, nodded slowly. The cry came again, a desperate, almost imperceptible mewl, laced with a pain that resonated deep within Patrick's own grieving heart. He moved toward the shed, each step cautious, the silence pressing in around him, amplifying the tiny, struggling sound. The shed, a jumble of splintered planks and melted tools, looked like a forgotten tomb. The cry, weaker now, seemed to emanate from beneath a warped piece of corrugated tin. He knelt, pushing aside a charred shovel, then another, his hands careful, almost reverent. And then he saw her. Darkness and pain, a searing, relentless fire that had consumed everything, leaving behind only an ache that throbbed with every beat of her tiny heart. The world was a jumble of heat and overwhelming noise, and then a terrifying, engulfing quiet. She was small, too small, and the instinct to hide, to vanish, was all that kept her from simply dissolving into the agony. And then a new sound, a deep rumble, a vibration that shook the earth around her. A giant, big, dark, looming, fear, sharp and primal, shot through her. She wanted to bolt, to find the safety of her mother's flank, but the fire had taken that too. All that remained was this relentless ache and the confusing scent of the towering creatures. A shadow fell over her, immense and threatening. She hissed, a pathetic, raspy sound, but it was all she had. Then a touch, not a claw, not a bite, but a gentle brush, a careful prod. More fear than a new sensation, an upward pull, a lifting. Her tiny, injured body was suspended, weightless, then cradled. The pain intensified with the movement, a sharp, white-hot sting, and she cried out, a thin, desperate shriek. The giant spoke in low, rumbling sounds, a confusing jumble of vibrations that vibrated through her small bones. The soft fabric beneath her offered a fleeting comfort against the throbbing pain, but the fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her belly. She was in an unfamiliar den, smelling of them, and strange, sharp scents that made her nose twitch with an instinctual unease. She was jostled again, a gentle rocking, then a new kind of light, brighter, harsher. More giants, Their hands were large, looming, but they moved with a strange, slow carefulness. One hand, soft and warm, touched her. Not to hurt, but to investigate. The sensation was foreign, unsettling. A sudden prick, a sharp sting in her leg made her yelp, a flash of pure terror. But then a warmth spread, a dulling of the insistent ache. Her eyelids grew heavy. Exhaustion, a heavy blanket, pulled her down into a hazy, dreamless void. Waking was a slow, confused surfacing from a deep, warm darkness. The sharp pain was gone, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache, more manageable. The air was different here, cleaner, with a hint of something sterile, yet also a comforting warmth. The giants were still here, their sense of constant presence, but they no longer moved with such terrifying swiftness. Their rumbling sounds were softer, less threatening. There was a dish placed within reach, a smell, rich and meaty, that made her stomach clench with a hunger she hadn't realized she carried. She hesitated, her instincts screaming caution, but the need was overwhelming. Slowly, cautiously, she stretched her neck, lapping at the cool, smooth surface. It was water, clean and sweet, not the murky ash-flavored stuff she'd licked from scorched leaves. Then came the food, a soft, warm paste that tasted of life itself. Each small swallow sent a wave of relief through her starved body. The giants watched, silent, unmoving, their gazes steady. Not predatory, not threatening. Days blurred into a cycle of gentle touches, soft rumblings, and the blissful relief of food and water. The sting of the needle was a fading memory, replaced by the warmth of a soft blanket. The taste of clean water after days of thirst. The meaty richness of the food. The giants, once terrifying, were becoming sources of comfort. Their hands, though immense, were always careful, always slow. One giant, the one with a deeper rumbling voice, would sit near her den, his voice a low, soothing murmur. She didn't understand the sounds, but the intention, the calm energy, began to seep into her wary heart. She could feel the new fur growing in, a soft, fine down replacing the scorched patches. The pain was receding, a distant echo, replaced by a growing strength in her small limbs. She still flinched at sudden movements. Her instincts still screamed danger. But there was a new feeling, a tiny, tentative spark. Trust. A fragile, flickering ember in the vast darkness of her past. The air reeked of unfamiliar scents, antiseptic and something metallic, like the coppery taste in my own mouth. My body, a collection of agonizing stings and throbs, was being lifted, then set down again. Each movement sent fresh waves of fiery pain rippling across my skin, especially where the fur felt like brittle ash, and the flesh was raw. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of pain. This was not the familiar forest floor, not the comforting darkness of a hollow log. These were giant, strange hands. Though they moved with a hesitant gentleness I hadn't known existed, I hissed a weak, reedy sound that felt like sandpaper tearing at my throat, but the sound was swallowed by the ringing in my ears. Where was the cool earth? Where was the safety of the shadows? Patrick stood frozen in the small, brightly lit examination room, the sterile white walls amplifying the dread coiling in his stomach. The creature on the table, barely larger than a house cat, was a horrifying testament to suffering. Lola, they'd called her. Lola the Bobcat. Her tiny body, shrunken by starvation, was a landscape of devastation. Patches of her beautiful spotted fur were burned away, exposing raw, weeping flesh. One ear was almost entirely gone, a pink, puckered scar where cartilage should have been. He could practically feel the heat radiating from her wounds, a phantom burn on his own skin. He remembered the smell of burnt toast from that morning. Then his mind flashed to the smell of smoke and fear that had permeated his childhood home after the fire. His mother's scent, fading, replaced by antiseptic and the metallic tang of illness. He gripped Joanne's hand, knuckles white. "Joanne," he whispered, his voice thick with a past he couldn't outrun. She's too far gone." The words tasted like ash. He saw his mother, frail and fading, in the bobcat's shallow, rapid breathing, in the way her head lolled slightly to the side. He knew this helplessness, this agonizing wait for the inevitable. He couldn't go through it again. But Joanne, her face pale but determined, squeezed his hand tighter. Her gaze, fierce and unyielding, was fixed on the small, trembling form. "We have to try, Patrick. We can't just let her die." Her voice was a low hum against the frantic pounding in his ears, a melody of stubborn hope. She saw not the brokenness, but the tiny, struggling spark of life. She had nursed injured birds back to health, patiently coaxed wild strays into trusting hands. This was different, yes, but the principle remained. Life deserved a chance. The giant above me leaned closer. Its scent was different now, less sharp. A new, softer voice, not the low rumble, but a higher, gentler tone reached my ears. It made a soothing sound, a soft cooing, even as another giant, dressed in a green cloth, approached with a sharp, glinting thing. Fear flared anew, and I tried to pull away, but my limbs felt like lead. A quick, stinging jab. Then a dullness began to spread, seeping into the fiery edges of my pain. The world swayed, colors blurring. Dr. Eleanor Vance, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, ran a careful hand over Lola's matted fur, avoiding the worst of the burns. She turned to Patrick and Joanne, her expression grave. "This little one, she's lucky to be alive, truly. She's been without food or water for days, maybe a week, and the burns are severe. 3rd degree in several places, particularly on her paws and flank." She pointed to a patch of dark, crusted skin. "The infection has set in, as you can imagine. We're dealing with sepsis, and that's a very aggressive battle. Her chances are slim, I won't lie to you." The words hung heavy in the air, a blunt instrument of reality. "It's going to require intensive care. Round-the-clock, antibiotics, pain management, specialized wound dressings, and fluids. A lot of fluids." Even then, she paused, her gaze resting on Lola's shallow breathing. "It's a long shot, a very, very long shot." The world around me softened, the sharp edges of pain receding into a distant thrum. The giant voices became murmurs. The bright lights dimmed to a hazy glow. A warmth, comforting and persistent, enveloped me, though the source was unseen. Then a new sensation, a tiny, almost imperceptible trickle of something cool and tasteless entering my body, deep inside. It wasn't water, not exactly, but it brought a strange relief, a sense of lightness where there had been only emptiness. My stomach, which had been a hollow cavern of agony for days, felt a subtle shift, not hunger, but a lessening of the gnawing emptiness. I drifted in between waking and dreaming. Sometimes I felt the light touch of giant hands, cleaning and pressing. There was a faint sting, then a new kind of relief, a dulling of the sharpest pains. I smelled something new too, a different scent from the giants, something like the earth after a rain, clean and fresh. My fur, or what remained of it, was gently stroked. It was tentative, cautious, and instead of fear, a strange, hesitant warmth bloomed within me. These giants weren't predators. They were soft. They spoke in low, soothing tones. And though I didn't understand the sounds, the intention felt kind. The water, clean and cool, was offered from a tiny bowl, not forced, but presented. I lapped weakly, the taste a revelation after days of unbearable thirst. The terror, which had been a constant companion, began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative spark of something else. Trust. A tiny, wild heart, fighting for every beat, brings back the deepest wounds. The world had become a blur of strange smells and jarring movements. Lola the bobcat felt a sharp sting on her flank, a momentary pain that faded into a dull ache. Then the warmth, a soft, unfamiliar blanket. Not the cold, hard earth she knew. Her body, once rigid with fear and pain, began to relax in spite of itself, the chill seeping from her bones. She could feel the gentle rise and fall of her chest, each breath a small victory. Giant shadows moved around her, their voices low and rumbling, a continuous hum that was both frightening and strangely not threatening. The first few days were a blur. Patrick, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, moved with a practiced grace around the makeshift recovery room. He remembered those first few days with his mother, the frantic beeping of machines, the hushed conversations, the desperate hope clinging to every labored breath. Lola, even in her weakened state, mirrored that fierce, desperate fight. She resisted, her wild instincts screaming at her to flee, to lash out at the towering figures who kept appearing, always with soft whispers and strange metallic smells. When they offered food, she would bat at it with a weak paw, then retreat, her small body trembling. It took hours of patient coaxing, of leaving the food just within reach and then backing away, for her to finally tentatively lap at the savory mush. Each small victory for Lola was a quiet, painful echo for Patrick, a reminder of the slow, agonizing decline he'd witnessed, the losing battle. He found himself talking to her, his voice a low, soothing murmur, not unlike the way he'd talked to his mother in her final days. A desperate attempt to bridge an unbridgeable gap. The feeling of the cool liquid sliding down her throat was a revelation. It wasn't the stagnant pond water she'd sometimes found, or the meager dew from leaves. This was clean, pure, and it soothed the raw scratch in her throat. The giants were relentless, but not cruel. They would touch her, a quick, firm hold, and then a tiny prick that stung, but then made her feel less. Less pain, less fear, more sleep. She learned to associate the soft swish of the door opening with the offering of the cool water, the bland but nourishing food. A primal part of her, battered and weary, began to recognize a pattern. Discomfort, followed by relief. Fear, followed by the quiet withdrawal of the giants. It was a slow, agonizing process of recalibration. Her world had shrunk from the vast, dangerous forest to this soft-lined box, but in its confines there was safety. A fragile, tentative safety, but safety nonetheless. One afternoon, the quiet calm shattered. Lola, the bobcat, felt a strange jolt, a sudden, uncontrolled spasm that ripped through her small body. Her limbs stiffened, her head snapped back, and a guttural sound tore from her throat, a sound she didn't recognize as her own. The world spun into a terrifying kaleidoscope of light and dark, a primal scream trapped within her. Patrick, working nearby, dropped the clipboard with a clatter. His heart hammered against his ribs, a sickening rhythm that dredged up the past with brutal clarity. His mother's eyes wide with fear, her body racked with tremors he couldn't stop. He froze, a cold dread seizing him. No, not again. He wanted to turn away, to run from the helplessness, the inevitable loss. But this was Lola. This was his chance to rewrite a terrible ending. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy, calling Dr. Vance. Her calm, steady voice was a lifeline in the storm of his panic. "Keep her safe, Patrick. Don't let her hurt herself. I'm talking you through this." He moved on instinct, his hands a blur of motion, clearing the area around Lola, ensuring she wouldn't strike her head. The seizure felt like an eternity, though it was only a few agonizing minutes. When it finally subsided, Lola lay limp, panting shallowly, her body exhausted but miraculously unharmed. Patrick knelt beside her, his breath ragged, the adrenaline draining from him, leaving him trembling. He gently stroked her head, his fingers tracing the soft fur between her ears. Her eyes, though still distant, slowly began to clear, her small chest rising and falling with increasing regularity. He felt a profound shift, a surrender of his fear to a fierce, protective resolve. He wouldn't lose this one. Not again. He wouldn't let the past dictate the future. The world had been a blur of terrifying scents and rough hands, then a painful sting, followed by a dizzying warmth. Lola, the bobcat kitten, knew only the constant throb in her side and the metallic tang of something new in her mouth. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light outside the strange, soft den she now occupied. The giants came and went, their voices a low rumble, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft, She remained a tight knot of fear and pain, hidden beneath the thick, scratchy blanket. Every movement was a fresh agony, a reminder of the sharp, burning sensation that used to be her side. But then, a shift. The burning lessened. It became a dull ache, a distant thrum. The water delivered in a shallow dish no longer tasted of metallic fear, but simply cool. And the food, a mushy, unfamiliar substance, smelled rich and offered a strange comfort to her empty belly. She ate in the deep shadows, eyes narrowed, ready to bolt. But the giants never tried to come too close during these vulnerable moments. They just watched. The female giant, Joanne, was the most frequent visitor. She'd sit for what felt like endless stretches, a low, melodic sound coming from her mouth. Lola didn't understand the sounds, but their cadence was different from the sharp, guttural noises of the creatures that had hurt her before. These were soft, even, like the gentle rustle of leaves in a breeze. Sometimes the giant would read from a strange, papery object, its pages crinkling softly. The vibrations of her voice were a steady presence, filling the small den. Lola found herself, almost against her will, listening. The pain was still there, a phantom limb of fear, but it was receding, replaced by a growing, hesitant curiosity. One afternoon, a new sensation, a light, warm pressure against the side of her den. It was the female giant's hand, placed carefully, not reaching inside, just resting against the wire. Lola flinched, instinctively flattening herself. But the pressure didn't push, didn't threaten, it just stayed. Her heart hammered, but no danger came. Slowly, imperceptibly, the relentless tension in her muscles began to ease. Patrick, the male giant, watched from a distance. He didn't make the soft sounds. His presence was more like a shadow, often observing from the doorway. Lola could feel his eyes on her, heavy and unblinking. He didn't approach the den, not like Joanne. This was both a relief and a source of continued unease. He was big, much bigger than Joanne, and his stillness felt like the predatory calm of a larger hunter. She'd twitch an ear, her nostrils flaring, trying to decipher his intent, but he never moved closer. He simply observed. Days turned into a week. The ache in her side was almost gone, replaced by an itch, a dull, persistent irritation under the bandage. She could stretch gingerly, and the world didn't explode in pain. The hunger, once a gnawing emptiness, was now easily satisfied by the rich, warm food. Lola still hissed if a hand came too close, a low, rattling growl rumbling in her chest, a reflex she couldn't control. But the hiss was weaker now, less conviction behind it. Then came the morning when Joanne started talking about a story. Lola didn't understand story, but she understood the rhythm of Joanne's voice, the slow rise and fall. It was like a lullaby, a constant comforting drone that pushed back the lingering echoes of past terrors. Joanne was sitting outside the den, her body turned slightly away, not directly facing Lola, a subtle sign of deference. Lola watched her through the gaps in the blanket. Her ears, once flattened in perpetual fear, were now slightly perked, catching the nuances of the sound. The world outside the den seemed less threatening. The scents were no longer just fear and metal, but also the clean smell of the fabric, the faint scent of human skin, and something else, a gentle, almost sweet aroma that she couldn't quite place. Joanne's hand, slow and deliberate, moved. Not towards the opening of the den, but along the outside of the wire mesh, gradually, almost imperceptibly, getting closer to where Lola was huddled. Lola tensed, every muscle coiling, ready to spring back, but the hand didn't rush. It moved with the slowness of a leaf falling. It reached the small opening, not going in, but resting just at the edge, an offering rather than an intrusion. Lola watched, her breath shallow. The hand was still, its presence a question. The purr, when it came, was so small, so faint, she almost didn't recognize it as her own. It started deep inside, a tiny vibration, barely audible rasp that startled even her. It was a sound she hadn't made since her mother had last licked her fur, long before the loud noises and the pain. Then, with an almost agonizing slowness, Joanne's fingertip bare this time, slipped past the wire, brushing the top of Lola's head. It was a feather-light touch, barely there, not a stroke, but a question. Lola froze. Every instinct screamed retreat, but the touch was gentle, warm. It didn't grab, didn't squeeze. It simply rested. And then something broke inside her. The knot of fear loosened. The tiny purr strengthened, vibrating through her frail body, a sound she hadn't known she still possessed. It wasn't a loud rumbling purr, but a soft, fragile trill, a whisper of connection in the overwhelming silence of her past. Her small head, almost imperceptibly, nudged into the soft warmth of the giant's finger. It was the first genuine sign of trust, a fragile, hard-won bridge built across the chasm of her fear, beyond the gnawing ache in her belly, beyond the throbbing of her wounded paw. What did a starving creature truly hunger for? For Lola, the bobcat, it was a question answered in the slow, agonizing thaw of her defenses. The world had been a brutal place, a series of sharp edges and sudden terrors. Now it was a soft cage, filled with strange smells and even stranger giants. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a dull ache of exhaustion and a primal, insistent demand from her stomach. The giant, the one with the gentle voice and the scent of earth and something metallic, had been a blur of movement and the sting of a tiny pinprick. Then came the warmth, not the burning kind, but a deep, soothing heat that spread through her limbs, dulling the sharp edges of pain. Water, clean and tasteless, had touched her tongue, and though she'd recoiled, the thirst had been too great to resist entirely. Now the hunger was a hollow cavern, echoing. She'd snapped, hissed, and flattened herself against the wire when food had first appeared. A strange, musky paste in a shallow dish. It smelled different. Not like the twitching warmth of a field mouse or the quick panic of a rabbit, but the scent was insistent, promising a different giant now. Patrick. She knew his scent. It wasn't the sharp, sterile smell of the first giant, the one who'd touched her paw with cold hands. Patrick smelled of warm hands, of something soft and comforting, and a faint, sweet tang of disinfectant. He moved slowly, his large form filling the opening of her enclosure. She watched him, eyes narrowed, every muscle tensed, ready to spring, to bite, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. He held a small, clear tube tipped with something soft. It looked innocuous. He pressed it, and a tiny bead of the paste appeared. He didn't push it at her, didn't shove it into her space. He just held it, patiently. The hunger, a ravenous beast within, warred with the deep-seated fear. A tiny, desperate lick. The paste was soft, warm, oddly palatable. It slid down her throat, coating the emptiness. She hesitated, a split second of warring instincts. Then another tentative lick, and another. Patrick remained still, a statue of patience. He squeezed the tube again, and more appeared. The sharp edges of her fear began to blur, softened by the immediate, overwhelming relief of the food. It wasn't a feast, but it was enough. Enough to quiet the rumbling, enough to make the world seem a little less hostile. As the days turned, a rhythm emerged. Patrick would come, sometimes with the same clear tube, sometimes with a small, flat dish. Lola still hissed, still flattened herself, but the fire in her resistance was dampening. She'd watch him, her golden eyes tracking his every move. Then the food would appear, and the primal urge would win. She started to eat more readily, less hesitantly. He spoke to her in soft, rumbling sounds she didn't understand, but somehow found soothing. He wasn't a predator, he wasn't a threat. He was the food giver, the soft speaker. Then came the change. One evening after the last smear of paste had been licked clean from the tip of the syringe, a strange, unfamiliar sensation rippled through her. The relief of a full stomach, yes, but something else. A yearning. Patrick's large hand, still holding the empty tube, rested gently on the floor of her enclosure, just outside the wire. She had hissed at it 1,000 times, swiped at it, warned it away. But tonight, the hand was simply there, warm and still. The fear was a distant echo. The comfort was immediate, compelling. She moved slowly, deliberately. Her paw, still a little stiff, took cautious steps. Her nose twitched, taking in the familiar scent of him. She reached the wire, her face almost touching it. The hand remained still. Hesitantly, she lowered her head and, for the first time, not in anger, not in fear, but in something akin to seeking, she nudged her head against the wire, pressing her soft fur against the warm, solid presence of his hand. It was a small gesture, barely a touch, but in that moment, the raw, aching wound in Patrick's own heart, the one he hadn't even realized was open, began to heal. He wasn't just feeding her body, he was feeding her soul, and in return, she, the wild thing, was feeding his. The raw edges of fear began to fray, replaced by a strange, insistent energy that pulsed beneath Lola at the bobcat's healing skin. Her wild nature quelled by pain and confusion, now stretched and yawned, demanding recognition. The cabin, once a warm, soft blur of safety, now whispered of confines and of boundaries that felt increasingly restrictive. The burns that had once seared her flesh had receded, leaving behind smooth pinkish scars that were slowly being reclaimed by new fur. Her strength, a fragile thing in the initial days, surged with each meal of raw meat and the careful ministrations of the giant hands. She tested her paws, stretching them out, feeling the firm grip of her claws. The metallic tang of the antiseptic was gone, replaced by the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the ever-present, reassuring scent of the giant woman, Joanne. Slowly, tentatively at first, she began to explore. The floor was a vast plain, the furniture a series of intriguing peaks and valleys. She scaled the armrest of the worn armchair, her claws sinking satisfyingly into the thick fabric, and surveyed her domain from this new height. An invisible fly, a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam, or perhaps just the echo of an old instinct, would trigger a sudden, silent pounce, her body coiling and uncoiling with fluid grace. The thrill of the chase, even an imaginary one, was intoxicating, a spark of the wildness that still burned deep within her. The cabin, with its soft blankets and bowls of food, was a haven, yes, but it was also a cage, and the bars, though invisible, were becoming increasingly heavy. The urge to climb, to stalk, to hunt grew daily. The confined space became a canvas for her burgeoning power. She scaled the bookshelves, sending a cascade of papers and old books clattering to the floor, her tail twitching in triumphant defiance. She discovered the joy of batting at hanging curtains, her small, sharp teeth tugging at the fabric, imagining it to be a scurrying vole. The giant woman would sigh, sometimes a soft, chiding sound, sometimes a murmur of affection as she gathered up the scattered items. Lola sensed the giant woman's gentle amusement, but also a growing tension, a quiet apprehension that vibrated in the air around them. The scent of the giant man, Dave, was different, more patient, perhaps, but equally shadowed by this unspoken worry. They understood something she did not, something about the limits of this warm, safe den. One afternoon, the sunlight pouring in through the window, making dust motes dance like tiny, edible spirits, Lola felt a surge of pure, unadulterated playfulness. The giant woman, Joanne, was kneeling, carefully arranging some brightly colored objects on a low shelf. Her back was turned, presenting a tempting target. Lola crouched, her tail twitching, eyes narrowed in mock predatory focus. This was a game they often played, a gentle wrestling, a soft nip and a retreat. She launched herself, a blur of spotted fur, aiming for the giant woman's shoulder, just as she had done countless times before with a rolled-up sock or a dangling string. But this time, something was different. Perhaps her burgeoning strength, perhaps a momentary lapse in control, or perhaps the sheer wildness that now coursed through her veins made her land harder. Her claws, though not intentionally extended with malice, sharper than usual. There was a sudden, sharp cry, not the soft chuckle she expected, but a sound of pain. Lola froze, her paws still pressed against the giant woman's skin. She saw it then, a thin red line blooming on the giant woman's forearm, a stark contrast against the pale skin. Her own claws were stained. The giant woman flinched, pulling away, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and something else, something that felt like a quiet understanding, a realization. Lola backed away, her tail dropping, the playful energy evaporating, replaced by a cold knot of dread. The silence in the cabin was suddenly heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths. In that moment, the giant woman and the giant man knew, and Lola, in her own instinctual way, knew too. The cabin was no longer big enough. Her freedom demanded a higher price than they could pay, a price that now included the accidental drawing of blood, a stark reminder that the wild could not truly be tamed, only cared for until it was ready to return to its own vast, boundless territory. The hardest lesson: can love truly mean letting go, even when it tears you apart? Patrick stood at the edge of the new outdoor enclosure, the scent of fresh-cut lumber still strong in the late afternoon sun, and felt that question carve itself into his bones. It was a question he'd grappled with for decades, a dull ache that never truly faded. Lola, the bobcat, was ready. Not fully, perhaps, but ready enough that keeping her confined indoors, no matter how lovingly, was beginning to feel like a betrayal of her true nature. Lola felt the unfamiliar breeze ruffle her whiskers. The air here was different, sharper, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth, not the warm, contained air of the house. The large human, Patrick, had opened a new door, not to the familiar rooms, but to a vast, intricate cage. It was unsettling. Her instincts, honed by the harshness of the wild before the humans found her, screamed caution. She pressed low to the ground, every muscle coiled, her ears swiveling to catch the slightest sound. The sudden, overwhelming scent of other creatures, faint but distinct, made her hackles rise. This was not the safe, predictable world she'd come to know. She took a hesitant step, then another, her paws sinking slightly into the soft, loamy soil. The strange warmth on her fur was not the blanket, but the direct kiss of the sun. Her whiskers twitched, sampling the myriad new smells: distant squirrel, decaying leaf, something sharp and green. It was overwhelming, a cacophony for her sensitive nose. Joanne watched from the porch, a mug of lukewarm coffee forgotten in her hands. "She looks so wild out there," she murmured, the words catching in her throat. Patrick came to stand beside her, his arm instinctively wrapping around her shoulders. The bobcat, Lola, was a reminder, a living, breathing echo of the void they'd carried for so long. The loss of their daughter, Lily, still hung heavy in the air between them, an unaddressed wound that pulsed whenever they faced another letting go. Lily had been the freest spirit, always chasing butterflies, her laughter like wind chimes. Patrick had seen it in Lola's eyes, even in her initial fear, a spark of untamed joy, a fierce independence that resonated with his deepest grief. He knew with a certainty that both comforted and terrified him, that keeping Lola was ultimately a disservice to her. Lola continued her exploration, her initial fear slowly giving way to intense curiosity. The enclosure was a puzzle of smells and textures. A thick log, rough under her paws, offered a high vantage point. She leapt onto it, her movements fluid and silent, and surveyed her new domain. Below, a small, gurgling stream trickled over smooth stones, the sound a revelation after the stillness of the house. She lowered her head, lapping at the cool, clear water. It was different from the bowl, crisper, with a subtle tang of minerals and earth. She felt a deep, ancestral contentment settle over her, an instinct long dormant now stirring. The giant humans, watching from afar, no longer felt threatening. Their scents were familiar, comforting anchors in this new, exhilarating landscape. "She's taking to it," Joanne whispered, a tremor in her voice. Patrick squeezed her hand. "She's finding her way, Joe. Just like we had to." He paused, looking at Lola, who was now batting playfully at a dangling leaf, her movements precise and graceful. He saw his mother then, so clearly it almost hurt. His mother, who had always said, "True love isn't possession, Patsy. It's helping something find its wings, even if it means watching it fly away." His mother, who had taught him about the wild things about respect and release, Lola was a vessel for those old lessons, a sharp, beautiful reminder that grief, like love, could morph into something empowering if you allowed it to. The bobcat continued her explorations, her senses alive. A squirrel chattered indignantly from a nearby tree, and Lola crouched low, her body a taut spring, her predatory instincts sharpening. This was her world now, a stepping stone back to the wildness that called to her. The gentle giants had given her a gift, a bridge to her true self. She could still feel the phantom ache in her leg, a ghost of the past, but it no longer defined her. She was strong, she was agile, she was Lola. And in this new space, where the wind carried whispers of distant forests and the sun warmed her fur, she felt the first stirrings of a freedom she hadn't known she'd lost. The world had been a blur of rough hands, sharp smells, and the terrifying jostle of confinement. Lola the bobcat remembered the biting pain, a searing ache in her flank that had stolen her strength and dulled the keen edge of her hunger. Then came the giants. They loomed, their voices a low rumble that resonated through her small, bruised body. One giant, a female with soft hands and a scent that was strangely comforting, had pressed something cool and wet to her lips, and the water had been a revelation after days of parched agony. The initial sting of the needle, a tiny, sharp jab, had quickly given way to a heavy warmth, pulling her into a sleep deeper than any she'd known in the unforgiving wild. Waking was a slow uncurling. Her body felt different, lighter, the throbbing pain a distant echo. The world smelled of pine and something else, something clean and fresh. Unlike the cloying dampness of her former den, the enclosure was large, its walls a sturdy mesh that let in the crisp air but prevented escape. Instinct, a deep, primal hum within her, told her this was not truly free, but it was safe. Food appeared as if by magic, plump, freshly killed mice, their warmth still lingering. She ate, her teeth tearing, her powerful jaws reclaiming their strength. Days bled into weeks. The giants, initially imposing and fearsome, became predictable. They brought food, fresh water, and spoke in those low, soothing tones. She learned to associate their presence with comfort, not threat. She watched them from the shadows, her keen eyes absorbing their every movement, learning their patterns. The enclosure became her territory. A small log provided a perch, mimicking a fallen tree in the forest. A patch of soft earth invited wallowing. Here, Lola the bobcat began her rehabilitation, though she didn't know it by that word. She knew only the surge of returning vigor. Her muscles, once weak from injury and starvation, rippled beneath her spotted fur. She practiced her pouncing, stalking imaginary prey among the tall grasses that grew in a wild corner of her sanctuary. Each leap, each silent footfall, honed her forgotten skills. A bird venturing too close to the mesh would trigger a flash of wildness, a low growl rumbling in her chest, reminding her of the hunt. Her eyes, once cloudy with pain, now shone with a sharp, predatory brilliance, scanning her domain with an effortless intensity. The giants would sometimes sit quietly outside the mesh, just watching. Their presence, once a source of unease, now felt almost familiar. The female giant, the one with the soft hands, would talk to her in a gentle murmur, not demanding, not threatening. Lola the bobcat would sometimes meet her gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. A fragile bridge of trust built across the species divide. She wasn't tame, not truly, the wild pulsed strong in her veins. But she understood the sanctuary they offered, the space they gave her to heal and remember what it was to be strong. Then came a new scent, a new feeling in the air. The giant female seemed different, her voice tinged with a subtle sadness. The enclosure gate, which had always remained firmly shut, was open one morning. A wide path led away, winding into a forest that had recently been transformed by spring rain. The trees were lush, the ground a vibrant green, the air thick with the promise of unseen prey. It was a familiar smell, a call from the deepest part of her being. Freedom. It pulsed, a powerful current urging her forward. The giants watched from a distance, their figures still and silent. Her paws touched the damp earth outside the gate, a rush of pure instinct propelling her forward. The air was richer here, the sounds more complex. The rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of a bird, the faint scurry of unseen creatures. She moved with a newfound grace, her muscles rippling, her senses fully alive. The forest embraced her, a cool, dark refuge. She paused, blending seamlessly with the undergrowth, her eyes sweeping the dense canopy, already seeking out signs, scents, the subtle movements of life. The giants were a fading presence behind her, their low murmurs lost to the rising wind. This was her world, reclaimed. But then, at the very edge of the tree line, before the forest swallowed her whole, Lola the bobcat stopped. She turned, her head tilted slightly, and looked back. Far in the distance, a small cabin nestled amidst the trees, the home of the giants who had saved her. For a long moment, she held their gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between wild creature and human benefactor. It wasn't a call to return nor a plea to stay, but a poignant, wordless farewell. Then with a flick of her spotted tail, Lola vanished into the green depths, leaving behind only the echo of her presence and a bittersweet, aching emptiness in the hearts of those who had loved her back to life. The cabin felt impossibly vast now, each creak of the old floorboards echoing the hollowness in their chests. Patrick ran a hand over the worn armrest of his favorite armchair, the spot where Lola the bobcat used to curl up, her tiny body a compact bundle of grumpy warmth. He missed the low rumble of her purr, a sound that always seemed to vibrate right through him, a testament to her gradual acceptance of their presence. Joanne, across the room, was meticulously wiping down a countertop, a task she usually delegated, her movements slow and deliberate. Lola's scent, a wild, musky undercurrent beneath the usual pine and wood smoke, was fading. It was a tangible loss, sharper than they'd anticipated, like the silence after a sudden storm. They found themselves reaching for a phantom head to scratch, instinctively turning at a non-existent rustle, or waiting for the telltale thump of a small body launching itself onto the bed. Lola's playful antics, the way she'd pounce on their feet from under the bed, the indignant flick of her stubby tail when she didn't get a treat fast enough, her surprisingly gentle nips had become the rhythm of their days. They focused on rebuilding, not just the physical structures around them, but the routines that Lola had disrupted, then reshaped. The garden needed turning over for winter, a new fence section was planned for the spring, and Patrick spent hours in his workshop, the rhythmic thud of his hammer a small comfort. Joanne started sketching again, the intricate patterns of wildflowers and local birds filling her notebooks, a solace she hadn't realized she'd put aside. Lola's journey, from a terrified, abused creature to a confident wild animal ready for release, became their silent strength. She was a reminder of resilience, of the capacity for trust to blossom even after deep wounds. Every task, no matter how mundane, felt imbued with a quiet purpose, a tribute to the little bobcat who had taught them so much about patience and unwavering care. They talked about her constantly, reminiscing about her first wobbly steps outside the crate, the way she'd learned to hunt the stuffed toys, the distinct, almost human-like sigh she'd emit when truly content. It was a healing process, this reliving of memories, cementing her place in their hearts. Lola remembered the sting, a sharp prick on her flank, followed by a strange, heavy warmth that spread through her limbs. Her world had been a blur of fear and pain, the gnawing ache in her leg a constant companion. Then came the giants. They loomed large, their voices a confusing mix of low rumbles and sharp, unfamiliar sounds. Their hands, massive and alien, had initially brought terror. She'd snarled, hissed, batting blindly with a good paw, her instincts screaming danger. But then came the soft bedding, the cool water lapping at her tongue, clean water, not the stagnant puddles she'd been forced to drink from. The taste was a revelation, pure and life-giving. The giants moved with a strange, careful slowness, their eyes surprisingly gentle, avoiding direct stares that always meant challenge. They smelled of wood smoke, and something else, something comforting. A scent that began to overlay the reek of her own fear. The pain in her leg, once a fiery inferno, slowly dulled. The giants would touch it, their fingers surprisingly light, and though a low growl would rumble in her chest, the touch wasn't cruel, it was healing. The smell of fear began to lessen, replaced by a tentative curiosity. The soft bedding felt glorious against her matted fur. The food they offered, rich and meaty, was a luxury she'd only dreamed of in her lean, hungry past. They brought small, soft things, objects that moved when batted, sparking an ancient hunting instinct that had been dormant for so long. The confusion began to clear, replaced by a new cautious understanding. These giants were not predators. They were providers, healers. The initial terror, a hot, urgent thing, receded, leaving behind a fragile but growing trust. She still kept her distance, still watched with keen, assessing eyes. But now, when one of the giants sat quietly humming a low tune, a strange warmth would bloom in her chest. A bitter, howling winter storm descended, blanketing the mountains in a thick, unforgiving layer of snow. The wind shrieked like a banshee through the pines, rattling the cabin windows. Inside, a fire roared in the hearth, but the chill still seemed to seep into their bones, a reflection of the cold emptiness outside. Days bled into nights, the world outside a monochromatic canvas of white and gray. Then, one frigid morning, after the storm had finally abated and the air was crisp and still, Patrick ventured out to clear a path to the woodpile. He stopped dead at the edge of the porch, his breath fogging in the sub-zero air. There, pressed into the pristine, newly fallen snow, not 3 feet from the cabin steps, was a single, unmistakable paw print. It was too small for a cougar, too large for a domestic cat. The distinctive shape, the clear pads, the slight indentation of retracted claws, it was a bobcat print, and it was fresh. A wave of raw, unexpected hope surged through him, chasing away the winter's chill. He knelt, tracing the outline with a gloved finger, a small, hopeful sign that Lola might still be near. The world outside the cabin had been swallowed by a hungry, white silence. Days had bled into a continuous swirl of snow, an unrelenting blizzard that pressed against the windows like a desperate ghost. Patrick, his breath fogging in the frigid air, wrestled with the heavy cabin door, the hinges groaning in protest. He had to clear the path, or they'd be truly trapped. Each scoop of snow was a battle against the rising tide of white. His muscles burning, his mind numb with the monotonous rhythm. He pushed deeper, carving a tunnel through the drift that now reached his chest, then a flicker, a shadow where no shadow should be, not in this blinding white expanse. He paused, shovel held aloft, his heart giving a single, erratic thrum against his ribs. It couldn't be. And yet there she was, Lola. Thinner, yes, her distinctive spots seeming to stand out more sharply against her leaner frame, but undeniably Lola. Her ears, tipped with those characteristic tufts, twitched almost imperceptibly as the snow swirled around her. Relief, sharp and sudden, pierced through Patrick's weariness, followed by a wave of disbelief. Months. It had been months since they had seen her, since she'd melted back into the wilderness they'd so painstakingly prepared her for. He took a hesitant step forward, his voice a rough whisper. "Lola?" The bobcat didn't bolt, didn't even flinch. Her gaze remained steady, unblinking. It was the same gaze he remembered from those first terrifying days, when she was a bundle of raw nerves and snarling defiance. He remembered the sting of her initial bites, the low growls that vibrated through the air, the desperate energy of a wild creature trapped and terrified. He remembered the agonizing patience it had taken, the hours spent simply sitting near her enclosure, letting his scent become familiar, offering soft words and softer hands. He remembered the slow, almost imperceptible shift, the moment her ears stopped flattening, the first time she allowed his touch, tentative and fleeting, a brush against her matted, injured fur. The deep gash on her flank, now a faint scar, had been a testament to her past struggles, a physical manifestation of the abuse she had endured before they found her. They had nursed her back, fed her until her ribs were no longer so prominent, provided clean water that she drank as if it were the elixir of life itself after days of thirst. Now she was here, back. She shifted then, a subtle movement, and Patrick finally understood why she hadn't immediately disappeared back into the white curtain of the blizzard. Curled tightly against her belly, barely visible amidst the pristine snow, was a tiny, scruffy ball of fur, a kitten. It was almost absurd, a miniature version of Lola, with the same slightly disgruntled expression even in its sleep. Its small ears were laid back, its tiny nose twitching. It was a perfect, pint-sized grump. Lola had not returned alone. She had brought new life, a continuation of her own fierce spirit. It was an offering, a testament, a trust. Patrick slowly lowered the shovel, letting it thud softly into the snow. He knelt, regardless of the cold seeping into his knees, his eyes fixed on the small family. The kitten stirred, letting out a tiny, almost imperceptible squeak, a sound so fragile in the vast silence of the storm. Lola glanced down, nudging it gently with her nose, then looked back at Patrick, a silent communication passing between them. He remembered the first time he had offered her food, a small piece of venison, after days of her refusing to eat. The desperate hunger in her eyes, the careful approach, the way she snatched it, then devoured it with a ferocity born of starvation. He remembered the slow, laborious process of getting her to drink from a bowl, then to allow his hand to be near as she ate. The trust had been earned, painstakingly, over weeks of gentle persistence. And now this vulnerable, precious trust. Lola, the survivor, the wild spirit, had chosen to bring her offspring, her most precious possession, to the very edge of the human world, to the cabin that had once been her prison and then her sanctuary. It was a profound gesture, a silent acknowledgement of the safety and care she had found here. Her journey back into the wild had been successful. She had thrived. She had become a mother. But when the bitter cold and the relentless snow had threatened her new life, she had remembered. She had remembered the warmth, the food, the hands that healed. Patrick, still kneeling, felt the first tears prick at his eyes, stinging in the cold air. He slowly reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, dried piece of jerky, something he always carried in case of a surprise encounter. He extended it slowly, carefully, just as he had done so many months ago. Lola watched his hand, then his eyes, then back to the jerky. Her decision was made. She lowered her head, nudging the kitten deeper into her fur, then took a single, deliberate step forward, her eyes never leaving his. It was a full circle, a snowy reunion that promised not just survival, but a bond renewed, strengthened by the wild and the tender heart of an animal who remembered. This wasn't just a return, it was a testament to a love that transcended species and circumstances, a silent promise whispered on the mountain wind and solidified in the shared breath between human and wild. For Patrick and Joanne, Lola's reappearance with her new life was an echo of their own journey, a profound understanding blossoming in the heart of their home. Lola, the queen of stealth, seemed to melt into existence, appearing on the edge of the cabin's clearing, not with a nervous skulk, but with a quiet confidence, and beside her, a miniature shadow, a tiny bobcat no bigger than Patrick's hand, all spots and wide, innocent eyes. Joanne, catching sight of them from the kitchen window, dropped the ceramic mug she was holding, thankfully onto the soft throw rug. "Patrick, get out here! It's a miracle!" Patrick, whose heart always seemed to beat a little faster at the sight of Lola, saw her immediately. But it was the small, trembling bundle at her paws that truly stole his breath. Joanne, she had a kitten. "Blaze," Joanne declared immediately, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "A little spark of fire, just like her mama." Lola allowed them to observe from a respectful distance, her eyes always so watchful, softening with an almost imperceptible trust. She would bring Blaze to the cabin clearing occasionally, not every day, but often enough to cement the bond, to show them this new life. It was a silent affirmation of her enduring connection, a declaration that even in the wild she remembered and valued the safe haven they had provided. The kitten, all instinct and wobbly legs, would tumble and play, chasing butterflies and batting at low-hanging branches, while Lola, ever vigilant, supervised. One crisp autumn afternoon, Blaze, emboldened by curiosity and the endless patience of the human giants, ventured closer than usual. Lola watched, a silent observer in the tall grass, her tail twitching almost imperceptibly. Blaze, having chased a particularly captivating dragonfly to the very edge of the porch, stopped, sniffing the unfamiliar wood. Patrick, seated on the top step, remained perfectly still, a gentle smile on his face. He offered a small bowl of water, as he often did for Lola. Blaze, after a moment of intense scrutiny, approached. Her small pink tongue lapped delicately at the cool water. It was a moment of profound vulnerability and trust, a bridge built with a single, precious drop of water. The world narrowed to that tiny creature and the soft lapping sound. Then, a surprising thing happened. Blaze, just like Lola had once done, lifted her head from the water and nudged Patrick's hand. Not with aggression, but with a soft, seeking motion. Her tiny head, no bigger than a teacup, rubbed against his palm. Patrick froze, a wave of emotion washing over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. It was Lola's gesture, replicated, a legacy of affection passed down. The tiny bobcat, a creature of the wild, instinctively sought comfort from the very human who had once saved her mother. He began to pet her, tentative at first, then with more confidence as Blaze leaned into his touch, a soft rumbling purr vibrating through her small body. Lola, from her vantage point in the long grass, watched them, her eyes calm, unblinking. There was no fear, no possessiveness, only a deep, quiet acceptance. It was as if she understood, not with human reasoning, but with the profound intuitive wisdom of a mother. She knew her kitten was safe, loved, and in the hands of a trusted friend. The sensation of that small purring bundle on his lap was a physical balm to Patrick's soul. He remembered the raw, aching grief he'd carried, the emptiness that had settled in his chest after his own devastating loss. For so long he'd believed that love, once lost, left an irreparable void. But now with Blaze, a new life, a vibrant spark of the wild, seeking his solace, something shifted within him. It was a full circle, a completion. The past grief didn't vanish entirely, but it softened, transformed by the warmth of this new, unexpected connection. The raw edges smoothed, and in their place, a profound sense of peace took root. He looked at Lola, who now lay down, closing her eyes, fully trusting. He looked down at Blaze, a tiny echo of her mother's courage and grace, and felt the last vestiges of his old sorrow dissolve, replaced by a love as vast and wild as the mountains themselves. The scent of pine and damp earth still clung to Lola, the bobcat's fur, even after the human's gentle hands had brushed it, smoothed it. She remembered the confusing chaos, the sudden overwhelming touch that had once meant pain, but now meant something else. A strange calm settled in her chest, a low thrum that wasn't fear. The giant's movements were slow, deliberate, always accompanied by a soft murmur of sounds she didn't understand but somehow felt. Her instincts, once screaming at every shadow, every unexpected sound, had learned a new rhythm. A rhythm of quiet anticipation rather than frantic flight. Lola and Blaze, the other bobcat, had become regulars, if occasional, visitors to the human den. The cabin, a sturdy structure nestled against the rising slope of the mountains, was no longer just a house. It was a sanctuary. The scent of cooking meat, a different kind from what she hunted, often drifted on the wind, a tantalizing invitation. They'd approach cautiously, slinking through the underbrush, their keen eyes assessing the stillness, the presence of the kind giants. Lola remembered the first few times, the internal struggle between deep-seated caution and a newer, inexplicable pull. The way the giants would leave out shallow bowls of water, fresh and cool, a stark contrast to the muddy puddles she often found. The memory of the sting of the tiny needle, a sharp momentary pain, was now overshadowed by the warmth of the blanket wrapped around her. The steady beat of a human heart against her own as she was carried. The humans, these strange, gentle giants, had slowly transformed from terrifying threats to sources of comfort. Their voices, once startling booms, now had a soothing quality. Lola, the bobcat, would feel a strange warmth spread through her chest when she saw them, a primitive acknowledgement of shared space, shared existence. The initial prickle of fear, a ghost of past trauma, had faded to a mere whisper. She remembered the clean taste of the water, cool on her parched tongue, after days of searching in the parched earth, the soft, yielding texture of the meat offered, not torn from a fresh kill, but given. The harshness of her past, the gnawing hunger, the constant vigilance against threats both seen and unseen, had receded, replaced by the quiet reassurance of this safe haven. The story of Lola and Blaze, the bobcats, became a legend in the local community, whispered around campfires and coffee shop counters, a testament to something wild and untamed finding a bridge to the human heart. It wasn't about ownership, not about taming, but about a mutual respect, a delicate understanding that transcended species. They were wild, fiercely independent, but they remembered kindness. They remembered trust. Their visits were unpredictable, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes just a few days. Always they came and went as they pleased, true to their nature. Then, one late autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned to fairy hues and the air sharpened with the promise of winter, Lola the bobcat and Blaze the bobcat appeared at the edge of the human den's clearing. They moved with an almost ethereal grace, their forms lean and strong, perfectly adapted to the rugged terrain. They paused, looking toward the cabin, a long, lingering gaze that seemed to hold both farewell and a promise. The humans watched from their window, a quiet understanding passing between them. No sadness, no sense of loss, only a profound sense of peace. Lola and Blaze turned, their tails flicking once, almost in unison, before disappearing into the vibrant, fully recovered forest. They left behind not emptiness, but the echo of their presence, a resonant thrum in the air, a whisper of enduring hope in the cyclical nature of life and healing. The forest had healed, just as their spirits had, and now they were truly home. If this video touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a simple comment. Maybe type 1 if you'd welcome more story like this, or 0 if you just want to say you were here, or sharing your thoughts about the video. We'll see you on the next video.